Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Veeam and CyberFortress 2023 Data Protection Trends webinar. I'm Nathan Anderson, CTO of CyberFortress.
Hey, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Dave Russell, Vice President of Enterprise Strategy in the Office of CTO at Veeam Software.
So, Dave, you guys have published a new report recently.
Yeah, we've been busy with some independent research. Going to get a chance to kind of go through a little of this just as a launching point for our conversation, Nathan. We're promised everyone we're not going to kill you with death by PowerPoint. I'm busy just enjoying hiding under my name here. See if I can get myself completely out of view here. If we kind of think about what's gone on, Nathan, it's hard to imagine that we're already almost through another year, meaning, we're on the cusp of 2023. But, when we look at what's going on, some of the research that you alluded to, we've done one piece that we can look at a few slides from is the industry's largest ever independent research in backup and recovery, about 3,400 respondents around the globe, 28 countries. We can cut that by a vertical, company size, geography. And then we double clicked on some cloud activity with our cloud protection trends research that we just published, as you alluded to, literally just a few weeks ago, 1,700 organizations. And no one knew this was Veeam asking. This isn't a Veeam research project, right? This is literally an industry independent research project. And thought some of it might be interesting to tee up some things for a little bit of riffing on what are you seeing, and I'll chime in with what I'm seeing.
Absolutely. It's really interesting to think about how much the cybersecurity landscape has changed and how much is not, how much is just kind of business as usual. But it's an ever evolving industry, and I think it's good to have a partner like Veeam on board to help us all navigate that. So do you want to just dive in and start
Yeah.
taking a crack at it here? Okay.
This one question we see here, it's a very simple question, which is that kind of dark blue in the middle there. Which of the following would drive your organization to change your primary solution? Check all that apply. Those are the long bars. And then this is stacked ranked by the shorter green bars. What's the most important? We've been asking this question now for 4 years, Nathan. I like to jokingly refer to this as the money slide. If you're a vendor or someone trying to satisfy what's up with data protection, this is 3,400 people saying, what are their pain points? And, what's interesting is these haven't changed materially over the year, meaning the top reasons why people are frustrated with backup and recovery and protection software. I started doing research 12 years ago, and it's always been some mix of cost, capability, complexity. And if you had to add a fourth C, I would say cloud. But I'll say one thing, and then let's just you and I have some conversation. Interesting that what rose to the top is to improve your SLAs, your service level agreements, by improving recovery point or recovery time objectives. And if you look at that, you could say, well, isn't that kind of an incriminating state of the industry, right? If the number one objective is just to get the backup software to take the backups or to be able to get the data back, is that problematic? And I think really what that's an expression of is that service level agreements keep increasing. All data is deemed important. Like we don't have tier 3 data in the data center or even in our personal lives for that matter. So I think there's some valid reasons why SLA or meeting SLAs are challenging for many of us, but love to hear your thoughts.
I think a lot of companies are really evolving and realizing that backups are a key component of their disaster recovery strategy. And it's a lot more than just checking a box and making an auditor happy. Yes, we have backups. They're off site. It's a lot more than that. It's a lot more in tune with the business objectives, keeping our business up and running. Every minute we're down is revenue loss, measurable. So having a really good partner in your backup and DR portfolio helps you minimize that downtime. And so I think it's just a signal that the industry's grown up a bit and evolving in general.
I like that. I mean, that's really a positive view of backups are deemed critical. The importance of backups, I would argue, and we'll get to it in a little bit, because you almost cannot have a conversation without introducing cyber at some point pretty
Yeah.
early on. But I would go so far as to say I think the security teams appreciate what backup and recovery and disaster recovery can mean to them as part of their overall practice. So yeah, rather than viewing of wow, we're missing service levels right and left, I think it's more of an appreciation of
Mhm.
the number two item there. We got to improve our reliability success of backups because we can't recover that which we've not backed up. And unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, we're having to recover with great regularity, some cases because of bad actors, in other
Mhm.
cases because of all the things that we've always had to worry about in the data center of
Yeah.
things going wrong.
Yeah. I think it's the compliance and security teams that are the ones organizing the tabletop exercises, and if we as an organization don't have a good strategy, then that looks bad. So we definitely play into that story with this data point. I think it's just kind of proving out that industry trend for sure.
Yeah, yeah. The next thing we double clicked on is a pretty ambiguous question or open ended, which is, what does enterprise backup mean to you, quote unquote? However someone might responding might define that. Same idea. Check all the boxes and then stack rank them by the most important. If you look at the long bars, Nathan, is this surprising at all to you? That, I mean, obviously this adds up well over 100%, meaning someone responding is checking multiple of these things, is saying these are attributes of enterprise backup. But anything jump out at you as being odd?
I don't think anything strikes me as odd. I think we're going to be dealing with these same topics in changing proportions, probably, but for the rest of our careers, right? I think SaaS is an obvious growing industry. I've been part of that myself. So I've seen the adoption rates just increase massively, and there's a whole lot of data out there to prove that. And so companies are relying on new tools like SaaS. We used to talk about cloud being the shiny new thing. Now it's SaaS, but companies are relying ever more on that for their business, and so they realize that backing that up, having a DR strategy for it is critical. And we're never going to see things like uh, you know uh, go away, like large old school kind of enterprise systems running in machines in the back room. That kind of stuff is going to be around for a very long time. Some of it is very difficult to replace. So enterprise backup is just getting more diverse. It's getting much more complicated. There's so many more things that you have to contend with these days. So a lot of traditional data center stuff is still going to be in play.
Yeah, I love how you said that. And that's probably a good reason why on the previous chart, people said meeting the SLA is challenging because to your point, we are turning on or expanding into new workloads, new delivery models faster than we're turning things off. And to your point,
Yeah.
we're rarely completely decommissioning something. And we probably arguably never will. The one thing that I loved about this is that those of us have been in backup for some period of time. What's now at the bottom used to be the defining characteristics for enterprise, meaning you have to have thousands of devices, or it has to be purchased by very large corporations. There was a different criteria about what enterprise means. Now it's, in my mind, it's more about the workload. And to your point, Nathan, those workloads are diversifying, they're expanding, and it's a question of adding more things than
Mhm.
it is about completely switching from things.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And tape is never going to go away. It's still showing up in your data points, right? Where that's going to outlive another thing that will outlive all of us, I think. But I think more and more customers are adopting, like you said, more tools, and the complexity is growing consistently.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And I guess that brings us to cyber, because you can't go more than like 3 or 4 slides without getting into ransomware or cybersecurity.
Yeah,
And unfortunately, Nathan, I think that's the world we live in. I don't think
yeah,
that, I mean, not to be pessimistic, rather to be realistic. I think that is forever going to be our landscape. And so, rather than being taken as surprised by that, we have to plan for that. And this is a data point that's basically saying, why do we actually have to take this seriously? That, it's not just a matter of headline chasing. So The question here was very simple. How many ransomware attacks has your organization had in the last year? Now, you could say good news that barely is the highest bar is none, but at 24%, obviously that means 3 out of 4 of the thousands of organizations surveyed got hit. One of the things that I always like to point out is that this we asked multinational corporations. So just because someone answered this in the United Kingdom doesn't mean they said none, but doesn't mean that their counterpart in Malaysia didn't actually suffer an attack. So let's not put too much stock in 24%, which is not the best number anyway. But Nathan, one of the things that scares me is that you look at the next two highest bars and the responses, the next two highest responses where I got hit twice or three times in the last 12 months. So clearly this is a reality that we have to face.
60% of respondents said that they were hit more than once in a 12-month window. That should open the eyes of any InfoSec team on the planet. You are all under attack 24/7, 365. There's nothing you could do to evade being a target.
Yes.
You can mitigate it. You can do everything right, and you can mitigate it. But 60%, that's kind of sobering. And like we talked about a couple days ago, Dave, there's a big difference in the attack surface of a cybersecurity event relative to, say, a natural disaster like a hurricane or floods. Um, just because you stopped one attacker does not mean that 30 seconds later there couldn't be another attacker right at your doorstep. You're less likely of having those kinds of repeat events with that unknown frequency with a natural disaster. You get a little bit more warning of those kinds of things typically, but
Yep.
this is very sobering. This is just kind of all the more stressing why you need a trusted partner helping you to develop a strategy and build a strong stance as far as backups and disaster recovery goes.
Yeah, one of the reactions I had is you probably have heard the story about Netflix and how they create a chaos monkey to see what
Yeah.
happens when the unexpected, takes place. And that's kind of the nature of cyber. I mean, the engineering mindset, historically, we've tried to reduce or ideally eliminate any fault capabilities, fault exposures. Cyber and this kind of data is basically telling us don't plan for perfection,
Mm.
plan for an escape. Have a plan and have a plan in advance. And to your point, have a partner set, have something in mind that you think you can really trust and bank on, have people that can help you because it's a crime of opportunity. Yes, they're targeted attacks, they're state sponsored attacks, but the vast majority of ransomware doesn't know it's a Nathan Dave Corporation. They're just scanning IP ports, looking for known vulnerabilities, sending out literally hundreds of thousands of emails, hoping somebody clicks a link. It's just,
Mhm. Opportunistic.
it's completely opportunistic, which is why this is not going to go away and why no matter what your company size or vertical or what have you, you're very much a target for this, even though you weren't directly targeted.
I've talked to a number of small business owners, IT staff stretched very thin. Wow, there's no way we could be in the crosshairs of a cyber attack. We don't have data that's interesting. That's not the point. The
Right.
point is not that your data is worth selling on the dark web. The point is you might be willing to pay a ransom if your data is encrypted, and that's all people care about. The you may have valuable data, and that makes you even more of a target for other reasons. But everyone's a target. There's no escaping it.
Yeah, 100%. One of the things you mentioned how, it could be multiple times a day and like a natural disaster, some of these natural disasters, say a hurricane, we see it coming from, potentially days away, or, we can kind of have appreciation that it's literally past, the storm has passed. Our chief information officer, security officer at Veeam, he used to be the CISO at Citibank. And he said on average, every day there were 3,000 plus cyber attempts that they knew of happening every single day, 7 days a week, no time off for holidays, etc. So there are many bad actors. The barriers to entry are fairly low. The thing is even if you discover a cyber threat, you don't know if you're in the middle of it that you discovered it early, if bad actors are still lurking. So it's really changes your response. But you mentioned an interesting thing, the motivation. The motivation is getting someone to pay the ransom. But, you know, is that really a great idea?
Oh, so controversial, right? Because you help fund the activities if you're negotiating with terrorists in a sense. But yeah, that's very complicated. Absolutely.
We hit another data point. We did ask, now, switching gears to a different survey, which was from 1,000 organizations that actually got compromised by ransomware. And we asked them, if you paid the ransom, what happened from that? Did that lead to a positive outcome? And so if we see the next graphic, what we find out is the majority of people, meaning 52% or roughly half, said we did pay the ransom. To your point, oh, is that a great idea? Because you are, giving a positive reinforcement of a bad action. However, I guess if there's good news, half at 52% said we paid the ransom and got the data back. But kind of scary to me is 24% said we paid the ransom and we didn't get the data. The kind of right answer in my mind that we'd love everybody at CyberFortress and Veeam to improve is that 19%, roughly
Mhm.
one out of five, said we didn't have to pay the ransom and we got our data back. That's just way too low of a number. Again, this is 1,000 organizations. So 190 of 1,000 were able to get out of this event with and get their data back and not have to pay the bad actors. But the crazy thing is 5%, one out of 20, 5% sounds low until you realize this is 1,000 companies. And one out of 20 of those 1,000 said no ransom was asked for. And I like to use the phrase, this was just arson, not extortion. This was literally chaos monkey in the reverse gone wild. So, what are your thoughts? Does that surprise you that so few people, from according to this stat, are
It
actually able to get out of this?
Yeah, it is actually, right? It is kind of surprising. And those are the companies that had good partners. Those are the companies that had good technology solutions. They had good DR programs internally. They were ready. They were the ones that were doing the planning ahead of time. And so kudos to them. But that number should be far higher. Absolutely. And as far as that unrecoverable portion, that 24%. I think there's so many reasons why that might be the case. I think there's cases where the bad actors just flat out refuse to honor their initial commitment to provide the data or provide the keys. I think in some cases you just end up with data corruption. You just do a massive swipe across an organization, encrypting hard drives. And I think a lot of us who've been in this business know what happens when you do that with files that are in use at that time, databases that are under heavy transaction load, things like that. Data just gets corrupted when you modify it that abruptly out of band. And so it may not even necessarily be that the bad actors were worse than you thought. It could just be your infrastructure was brittle and couldn't handle that kind of a big change. So many reasons why you need a good strategy for this. Absolutely.
Well, I love what you just said there because, one of the things I like to point out is traditional backup and recovery, meaning, oops, I accidentally deleted a folder, or, oh my gosh, a hard drive failed. All of that in totality generally meant that we only had to restore 3 to 5% of the data that we backed up in a 12-month period. Of course, you didn't know which 3 to 5% of data, and you didn't know when or what time or what day. But to your point, meaning stress on the system, Nathan, I mean, all of a sudden, worst case scenario, and you have to plan for worst case, 100% of your organization's data could need to be brought back. Talk about putting stress on a system and stress on the teams trying to get this back while no doubt management is either literally standing over their shoulders or instant messaging, for an update every other minute.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the other component of this, that without the right level of planning, you have no idea what data you might need to
Mm.
recover. If you have a good strategy going into that, then you know that obviously we have corporate databases and file servers, the obvious components of that 3 to 5%, but you may have some random business process that's more critical than you realize that requires Excel files on a finance analyst's workstation. That without that you can't do a board report, and if you don't have that backed up too, then you may be able to eventually recover from that, but it's very painful. So you have to think about your entire business, and this is very much a business continuity discussion.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, there is no greater existential threat than something literally potentially trying to take
Yeah,
out 100% of your data and your
yeah,
business processes.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we got to bump up that 19%, Dave.
For sure. Sure. Yeah. Talk about New Year's resolutions.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You do not want to be one of the other percentage of that on that spectrum, that graph, for sure.
Definitely. So if we look at some other data points kind of overall from a cloud perspective, a little bit of myth busting on each one of these graphics. And if we go kind of left to right, this is again from our recently published cloud protection trends. You can see the URL at the bottom
Mhm.
there. But what's interesting, Nathan, is it's not all lift and shift, meaning of the production workloads. It's 70%, and it's close to even between virtual machines on-prem that went to the cloud, physical machines on-prem that went to the cloud. But the myth busting portion on the left hand side, I like to point out is well, but we're approaching 1/3 of cloud designed, cloud native workloads. So it isn't people just changing zip codes, getting stuff out of the data center anymore, is it?
No, no, it's absolutely not. I think the move to cloud showed the industry that there was a huge amount of new capability that was introduced to IT organizations, but it didn't replace everything, right? It's not a new tool that completely eliminates everything else in your toolbox. It's just another new tool in your toolbox to use where appropriate. So I think we're always going to see that where workloads are designed and built for specific purposes, and they may live in different environments as a result of that.
Yeah, excellent point. And because of that, or doubling down on what you just said, different environments, we asked the question on the right, did you repatriate any workload? Meaning, did you bring anything back from cloud on-prem? And want to be careful to set this up correctly. 12% said absolutely not. It was a one-way street, at least to
Mhm.
this point. But of the remaining, don't view that they brought, meaning 40% in that bar there, second to the left, said we brought back all of our data. No, this is just did you bring back any portion? And if
Mhm.
so, for which reasons? So there's a variety of reasons, maybe it's because of DR, maybe it's because of migration. But what I really think is interesting is the highest reason people selected for I brought data back was that was always the plan. Nothing changed. We just wanted to dev in the cloud and go back on prem. Maybe it was the pandemic. We just needed some resources very rapidly. We couldn't rack and stack gear, or today, not all of us can get gear with supply chain issues. So we burst into the cloud as just part of a planned process. This is nothing changed. But I love this notion here because it speaks to the bi-directionality of data. You want to make sure you're partnering with providers and tools that can
Mhm.
help you move in multiple directions, even if you didn't plan for it. Meaning, 3 months from now, if it turns out going to a different cloud or bringing something back on prem, you want that flexibility.
think I think you nailed it. I think the hybrid environments is absolutely where companies are continuing to utilize the cloud. Right? They burst workloads into the cloud. They have dev environments. They have whatever it may be. Right? It may actually just be extra production capacity. And they know that in a DR situation, we may be somewhat resource constrained. We won't have the full environment. Our load won't be completely smooth as it was when we had these other environments at our fingertips. But we can migrate them there and back again, and it's interesting that the data is proving that out.
Yeah. If we think about, and you mentioned SaaS applications earlier and how, SaaS is something that arguably more and more of us have embraced or embraced more fully because of the pandemic. And to me, the poster SaaS app is M365, Microsoft 365. So we asked a specific question, on that in this cloud protection trends research. And here we actually cut it by personas. So this is not a choose all, choose most important. This is the SaaS administrator is that top kind of blue bar. The green bar is the backup administrator. What I think is interesting, Nathan, is first of all, let's do a little myth busting. This is not a knock on any SaaS provider, especially Microsoft, but it's a reflection of the reality, which is both groups of admins, SaaS and backup, are saying the top reason they think they should protect Microsoft 365 is to fend off cybersecurity attacks. So just going to SaaS doesn't somehow equate to safety.
I think even the big players here in the industry are just as much in the crosshairs as the mom and pop shops. David Nathan Incorporated is obviously a target, but their SaaS providers are targets as well. I think we're seeing that play out right now. Rackspace is still suffering from a
Yeah.
prolonged, email outage. And they're recommending customers move to M365. And so, but I think all the big players, Microsoft is a huge target as well. They happen to have enormous IT staff that can help mitigate those attacks and very large infrastructure. So, but regardless of that, customers don't trust their SaaS providers 100%, nor should they.
Right.
I think this is showing really good awareness that there's vulnerability no matter where your data lives.
Yeah, and what I think is interesting on this chart is just the variety of reasons. Don't even worry about the percentages per se, but if you just look at what are the reasons that these two administrative groups are saying that they'd want to protect. And in some cases it's for compliance. I got to keep this around longer than the 90-day, mailbox deletion.
Mhm.
The traditional, oops, somebody made a mistake, meaning that accidental deletion of data kind of towards the middle there,
Yeah,
pretty high for both of those groups. But look how high the one underneath that is, meaning malicious user or internal threat. The
yeah,
SaaS admin actually voted for that 39%. And of course, you could vote for multiples of these, and clearly they add up to over 100% per group. So each of those admins are thinking, there are multiple bad things that can happen even in a SaaS app.
absolutely. And this is a long-standing trend too, right? The rogue employee on their way out that deletes
Yes.
data, or just infiltration to some degree that by some vendor or what have you. This is a threat that's always going to be there. So it's not surprising that it's still showing in the data. It is interesting though that the SaaS vendors in particular, or SaaS administrators in particular, are deeply concerned about that. And I think maybe a little part of that is just that different SaaS tools have such radically different capabilities of preventing that kind of malicious behavior. And so it's a little bit of Wild West. There's no industry standards for that, so it's always going to be a concern.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll play kind of, pop psychologist and try to read into that, meaning why is the SaaS admin particularly, vulnerable to that? And obviously, degree of difficulty is subjective, but when I talk to people, it meaning administrators, bringing back, let's say a document, bringing back a contact in M365 is not as easy as it sounds. It's not like just click on, the Explorer, go find it and drag and drop. There's a lot more to it, meaning it puts complexity onto that administrative group if they had to use the native tools. So having something dedicated that can help them go fish out the individual item, or if they, God forbid, did have to bring the whole application back or all of the data associated with
Mhm.
that, they could.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we all know how much we rely on email just for day-to-day business communications, and how much of our data actually lives in that environment in an unstructured way, and it's crippling to a business if they don't have backups. But it's very, like you said, it's very tedious to do very granular file level, email document level restores. Absolutely.
If we kind of switch gears, we asked some open-ended questions, like the first one around BaaS, backup as a service. And it was very simple. It was just, which of these would drive your organization. I'm sorry, that's interesting. Oh, I think the actual question is around, what does BAS mean to you? And what the top answer was essentially, I want this thing to run from the cloud. So when we ask, what is BAS, you could answer these various things and what would make you want to consume as a service. You see a variety of responses, but a lot of it is just I don't want to be involved in the day in, day out. That's how I would summarize it. What's your read?
No, I think you're right. I think IT staff in general in the current economy is being stretched more and more thin, right? You hear about layoffs, you hear about shifts in workforces, and I think the people in your environment who are protecting your organization from these kinds of threats are under more and more pressure every day, and they may be more and more resource constrained every day, and so uh, th- these kind of they just they need more help in
Yeah.
general, and it's to the point where without a really good trusted provider, you're putting a lot of burden on your existing staff. You're really trusting in them to have the business's best interest in mind, even when their resources are more constrained than ever.
Well, I love that comment. And if we double click on something similar, but ask from a disaster recovery as a service perspective, that notion of people that you mentioned actually percolated up to the top. And so similar kind of cue, but the question was really, which of these best describes, from a disaster recovery perspective, why you would engage as a service versus, roll it on, do it yourself. Look what rose to the top. It's expertise. And that kind of makes sense to me because I don't want to say backup is simple. However, the notion of on a good day, I just have to go get a file or a folder is very different than disaster recovery, where suddenly you're dealing with security permissions and networking and which application groups have to come together to actually stand up a business process. It's going to be the web facing engine, it's going to be SharePoint, it might be a CRM system. So that notion of expertise, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, whoa, I click. And I think the sophistication of the attacks that we're starting to see is also ever increasing. So, having a staff that is trained today is going to be great to help you today. But then in 6 months, when the landscape has evolved and there are new threats, and that's just a never-ending game that you're gonna have to play. It's a lot to keep up with over the long term. It really is.
And I
I
actually,
I also think that there's a bunch of other data points in this that are kind of fascinating to me. It's not just freeing up IT resources. There's also a level of cost efficiency here that the your fourth data point too. I think companies are looking to shave costs wherever they can right
yeah.
now. And so I think that there are a lot of ways where a really good backup vendor could help with that and help design a DR strategy that is the right fit for the company's needs. And if you're just relying on your internal staff to do that, they may not have quite the level of expertise.
Yeah, I like that comment because it's not a negative reflection on the staff. The staff is most assuredly overworked, extremely
Absolutely.
busy, trying as hard as they can to keep operations going, even dealing with supply chain issues, pandemic challenges, shifting business models to, more of a digital transformation environment.
Mhm.
They're trying to juggle all of that. And now we're also asking them to keep abreast of various changing security vectors, as well as what are the possibilities for how I can best recover versus importing someone that can pop in and say, look, this is our business. We can offer you the menu of choices, which might be appropriate to you. Talk about the art of the possible,
Yeah.
what's most important for your individual workloads.
Yeah.
Again, I don't view that as any way a negative reflection on the IT teams. Frankly, it's amazing the last several years how the teams have been able to function as well as they have.
Absolutely. That second or third slide we looked at, and the number of repeat attacks in a
Yeah.
12-month window is just another example of how that's very complicated to navigate.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And we mentioned earlier about, cloud repatriation of data. Well, even from a backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service, it actually has been a bit fluid, meaning what did people start with and then what are they consuming today? And so if we look at another data point around BAS and DRAS, what we end up seeing is up at the top, we've only used unmanaged, or I'm sorry, managed backup as a service. 10% said that. 20% said, yeah, we went to the cloud and we just started basically pointing our backups on-prem to the cloud. 20% said that's what we started with, that's what we're doing. So obviously you add that up, 30% said we started with one thing and that's what we're doing today. However, 70% of the organization said they made a switch, meaning they may
Yeah.
have started with one of those, but the highest response was 48% said we started with cloud storage, meaning just a bit bucket in the sky,
Mhm.
but we later added or switched to a managed BAS provider. And then 22% said, well, we had a BAS provider, but we later switched to a cloud storage target, far lower. Less than half of the people at 22% said that was the change they made versus almost half of the respondents said we started with the cloud as just a replacement, maybe for
Mhm.
on-prem tape or replicating data ourselves to another
Yeah.
colo, and we wanted help.
Easy way to get data in another geography, right? Like relatively trivial actually to get a cloud data storage bucket, throw some S3, get the permissions set up right, and now you have your data outside of your physical data center with relative ease. And I think a lot of companies realize that that's an easy way to get started. The cost of getting data out of the cloud, though, when you need large amounts of it, gets to be kind of cost prohibitive. And I think companies realize that they have an interesting opportunity to leverage that same cloud environment as their DR environment, right? If my data is already there, it's so much easier to spin up a DR environment where that data lives than it would be if I was having to move data back out of the cloud to get it into an environment where I could perform a disaster recovery scenario. Takes time. They take days, and and
Yeah.
so and so I think a lot of that is just showing that customers are kind of realizing that you take one or two steps in that direction, and you're better off moving further into that world than you are kind of shifting your strategy entirely.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, what you kind of alluding to data gravity there. And if you've already got data in one location for a backup perspective, why have to move it again? Why have to go try to re-platform that, send it across the wire, send it to new infrastructure? The other way to look at that is kind of an optimization story. How can you get the most out of what you've already invested in, the data that you've already placed in one locale? So I almost
Absolutely.
like to think of it as why not just resume rather than recover? And yeah, there was a discontinuity in service, but you got back up and running much, much faster than you would have otherwise. And you didn't have to build out all the infrastructure in advance, just hoping that you had it covered just
Yeah.
in case. Because to your point on efficiencies and economics, very few of us have that kind of luxury anymore.
Absolutely. And I think that's where a really good DR partner comes into play. And that's one of the things that we tout ourselves here at CyberFortress as being is that trusted partner. We have capacity for you. We can help you with the DR strategy. We can help with a strategy that gets the data into the locale you want it. And so that's Veeam is a key component of that architecture and that strategy for us. And I think businesses who are invested in these kinds of tools are starting to learn that's what they really need help with.
Yeah, you're the perfect straight person because the last data point slide, yeah, I can actually share that
Hmm.
that's exactly the industry trend. Here we asked, on when we think about availability as a service, meaning backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service. What are you looking for? We asked the IT operations team in blue. This is the personas on the right. And then the backup teams in green there. And collectively, what they came out with was this continuum of what kind of capabilities and experience they'd like to have for BAS and DRAS. So a little less than half, 46% said that they want to completely or mostly manage it themselves. Let's take out that gray middle, that 23. What's interesting is year over year, 31% of these IT ops and backup admins are saying they would like either most or all of BAS and DRAS managed by a provider. And Nathan, that number's gone up from, it's almost doubled. It went from 16% last time we surveyed to 31%. And in my mind, that is a appropriate reflection of I came in skeptical. I wanted to make sure this was valid. No blind trust, in other words. Now I have more experience with it. That is why in the previous slide we saw people shifting from the cloud as a bit bucket target to now exploiting 44 or 48% of the people said it was, they shifted. It's, 48% said they shifted from a bit bucket to as a service. So exactly what you said. I think organizations are realizing managed service providers, the expertise they bring, the economies of scale, the ability to get equipment, that matters.
Does. It does. And it's interesting that it's changed so much just since your last survey point. I think we're going to see that trend continue for some time. I really do. I think more and more customers are adopting more and more complex tools, as we've talked about. The economy is changing and putting more stress on organizations. The security threat landscape is ever evolving, ever increasing, and not going away anytime soon. Like the pressure is just squeezing the industry in that direction to the right of this of that graph. Just
Yeah.
constant pressure squeezing the industry there. So, yeah, I definitely think you'll see a lot more of it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think it's a trend that's here to stay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I know we're getting close to our time. Always great to riff with you. Look forward to seeing you
Absolutely.
again. Last time I saw you was in Barcelona, so
Yeah.
trying to continue to find exotic places to meet up. Now is the knock on wood, the world's coming back to normal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's been a pleasure, Dave, as always. Feel like I could chat with you for hours here. So thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of open up for any questions anybody might have. Dave and I are kind of at your disposal for anything any questions you might have, any content you might like us to kind of reiterate on or cover again.
Yeah, and while we're looking at that, I love the QR code here to download, some of the materials. CyberFortress has all kinds of resources at the ready. Veeam, one of the things that we really like about important providers is, the same reason we are unlikely to see Veeam start to ship metal boxes is that's not our expertise. And the same goes for delivering end-to-end services is, you guys deal with that day in, day out. You're subject matter experts there. You handle certain geographies, certain verticals, certain scenarios that we just don't have the same level of expertise in. But I do see we had one question come in already from Tim.
Yeah, so Tim asks, what does an onboarding with a DRaaS provider look like and the steps? So, what that looks like is contacting someone like us, like CyberFortress, and our experts will work with you on a multi-step plan for analyzing and understanding what it is you're looking for, right? Where does your data live? What does your business look like? And what would a DR strategy look like for you? So we have experts that will hold your hand and walk you through that every step of the way. And we have onboarding teams that will help get that built out. Will help build out a DR testing strategy for you. Will help building out, retention policies that meet your needs, et cetera, and we'll get the right tools in place for you in your organization. And that kind of goes back to what we're talking about with those trusted experts and someone who can build a solution that is custom to your specific needs. And so Veeam and CyberFortress are here to help with that.
Yeah, and I like that notion there. Nathan, you mentioned about help devise a plan because it's an analogy I always like to use is any of us could go to Home Depot or Lowe's or think of any of these massive big box hardware stores. and buy tools and buy supplies, that doesn't mean that I can go build the kitchen cabinets myself just because I can get the materials. And as we pointed out, it's not always possible in every case that you can get the materials. So it's really answering the what don't you know? How do I get started? What's the right sequence? Making sure that there aren't things that I forgot. You don't want to find out the hard way that you've missed something in the step in the process. There is absolutely no reason in my mind not to import subject matter expertise from a qualified service provider.
Absolutely. And key piece of that is testing your backups, testing your DR plans. That's yeah, a backup is not a backup if it's not tested and verified.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to steal that. I'll attribute it to you for sure, but I'm going to
Oh, I
steal
don't think
it.
I made that up either.
Yeah, testing is a dying art. And so, that is one of the big challenges where and big risks, frankly, as we saw maybe from that ransomware notion is if that's the time you're actually, as our British friends would say, using your recovery systems in anger, if
Yeah,
that's when you're actually trying to put something through its paces and unfortunately possibly not learning that, oops, we made a mistake, that's the most unfortunate experience you could have, right? And obviously you don't have the resources, or at least most of us don't have unlimited resources in terms of skill and people and time and et cetera. So, let someone short circuit that for you. There's a reason that, if you're a guitar player, you probably go on YouTube and learn some things. Maybe you go to a special instructor, let somebody help save you the time so that you don't have to learn the hard way.
absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love to learn guitar from you, Dave. Sounds
Next time we're in Barcelona, I'll bring two.
like a plan. Any other questions for us?
Well, I'll give one piece of advice. Maybe you can give one piece of advice. I've long tried to use a saying at this time of year. The goal ought to be to begin to enter next calendar year in better shape than we're ending this year from an IT perspective, in this case, from a backup perspective. And the main thing that I always like to point out is it's understandable to say, I don't know if I can do everything, but you can do something. And so the thing that I would sort of hope that people would do is take some data point or even a couple of data points from this conversation and say, okay, what can I do to begin now to revisit and understand, what I can do to improve our practice. So we do have
Yeah,
one last one that came in before I wrap, Nathan.
sure, sure. So what advice would you give a customer who's never tested backups or replicas before? Where do they start? Wow. That's an excellent question, honestly, and one that I think a lot of organizations are facing all the time, and they may not want to admit it either. I think the best way to get started is to just be intentional and look at the systems that you have and prioritize first based on the ones that are most mission critical, and think, run a full tabletop exercise. Don't just try to test the backup in isolation. I would suggest starting from a little bit broader perspective than that and run a tabletop exercise of what a failure with that system might actually look like. Um, and then determine how we might want to test that and how can we validate to the business that that system functions with this restored environment, this in a capacity that's good enough to maintain business continuity. And so just answer those questions, and it's going to be different for every kind of system that you deal with, whether it's a database or a file server, or in 365. Just three random examples. The backups are going to be different, the recovery is going to be different, and so your testing strategy is going to be different for each of those. So think about what those top few most critical systems are, and work on them. And if you need a partner to help you with that, give us a call. If and and if your IT staff is well versed in these tools and these techniques, then great, that's awesome. Utilize them, push them to the test. Take downtime, maybe during the holiday season here, when maybe you have some change moratoriums, for example, and your production environment is not going to undergo huge amounts of change. Take some of that downtime and actually work on a DR plan, work on a DR strategy, and build up some environments. Maybe build a quick little DR environment above the cloud if that makes sense to you, just to kind of test the waters out. But this is a good time of year to, to your advice, Dave, about thinking about 2023, planning for the next year, be intentional, and use this planning time as that moment of developing a strategy. Your strategy may involve pulling in trusted third parties like us, and when you're ready for that, we're here to help.
See, right there in that response, that is the value a service provider brings is what do I do when I'm not sure how to take on something or where do I get started? That's why CyberFortress provides, in my opinion, invaluable resources and capabilities. I'll give a slight Veeam commercial, Veeam solution, and there's others, and I would encourage you, whatever solutions you adopt, seek out this feature set capability where there is ability in the tool itself to verify the backups or the replica so that you know why you still have a production copy of your data if there is a problem. And that verification or automated verification system should be ideally more than heartbeat ping on a VM. If it's a SQL server, let's issue some SQL iterators against it. If it's SharePoint, let's go find a record or something like that. But to Nathan's point about, okay, but where do you get started? How do you get going? That's the value that a partnership can bring to the table. It's not obviating the need for your own staff, your own IT professionals. It's importing expertise and taking certain aspects off of your plate.
Your staff knows your business really well, as they should, and we can help you augment that with a backup strategy, with a DR strategy. And so it's very much, our engineers relying on your expertise, because you understand your business and your applications well. And so we can partner with you on the gaps. We can partner with you on the backup and DR gaps.
Awesome. Well, Nathan, great to chat with you as always.
Likewise, likewise, Dave.
Have a
Well,
great rest of the day.
thanks everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.